never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Fine.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Happy Thursday to everybody out there. This is going to be a big weekend in the world of college football, and I say that knowing that in all reality, this weekend doesn't even count because this is Clemson's bye week, and I think by now we've all established that if Clemson doesn't play, none of the other games matter, so this is a practice week. But I say big week because this week's college football slate actually started on Tuesday night. But there's also a few games coming up on Saturday that may determine the playoffs as far as who gets in and who gets left out. But first, let's talk about Tuesday night's game before we get to Saturday. Tuesday night, we saw Liberty defeat Jacksonville State 31-13, and Middle Tennessee State defeated Louisiana Tech 31-23, and Coastal Carolina defeated Appalachian State 27-24. There was a couple of games last night, but as I always try my best to do, I don't really want to talk much about them because there might be somebody out there that has not watched them yet, and I don't want to give anything away. But coming up tonight, we have two games, 7 o'clock on Fox Sports 1, West Virginia at Houston, and 7:30 ESPN, SMU and East Carolina. Coming up tomorrow night, we have three games. Tulane at Memphis, 7 o'clock ESPN. Fresno State and Utah State, 8 o'clock CBS Sports Network. And Stanford at Colorado at 10 o'clock on ESPN. And now we'll talk about Saturday. As is per usual, there's a few games on the slate that aren't even worth turning on the TV for. But as I said a while ago, there is a few games coming up on Saturday that may determine some playoffs. So let's go ahead and talk about the Saturday games. We'll start, as always, with the noon games. Georgia, who should be a 95-point favorite because Georgia's looking better and better every week, and Vanderbilt is, well, they're Vanderbilt. But Georgia at Vanderbilt will be the CBS game. The Fox game is Indiana at Michigan. Peacock has Ohio State at Purdue. ABC has Syracuse at Florida State. ESPN has Arkansas at Alabama. The Big Ten Network has Michigan State at Rutgers. Fox Sports 1 has Iowa State at Cincinnati. ESPNU Temple at North Texas. ESPN2 Georgia Southern at James Madison. And CBS Sports Network has Kent State at Eastern Michigan. And I heard somebody earlier in the week, it might have been Tuesday, that was complaining about Ohio State playing at noon because they're a Buckeye fan and they don't want Ohio State playing at noon. And I just do not understand for the life of me, and it's not just Buckeye fans, you hear it from every fan base in America, on why they complain when their team plays at noon. And I talked about it a few weeks back when Clemson played Florida State, because there was a few Clemson fans complaining about the noon start time. And I just do not understand it. If you actually sit down and stop bickering, stop complaining, stop whining, and look at the TV ratings, most of the time, the noon games have outstanding ratings. If the noon time slot wasn't a desired TV spot, you wouldn't have 417 channels carrying a noon game, and Fox wouldn't put millions and millions of dollars to have a big noon kickoff every week to carry a game that nobody's going to watch. That makes no sense whatsoever. So the fact that Fox puts millions and millions of dollars into a noon game tells you people are going to watch it. You're not going to pour money into a game that nobody is going to watch. It just doesn't make any sense. It's also better to play at noon because typically, usually, most of the time, the later it gets in the day, the better the games are. So if you play at noon, there's probably going to be one, maybe two other games that are worth watching on at the same time your team is on. Whereas if you play at 7:30 that night, there's probably going to be 6 or 7 other games on that are worth watching. The more good games that are on at one time, the less people are going to be watching one game because you're going to channel surf. 3:30 on Saturday, we have UMass at Penn State on the Big Ten Network. And here's one of the games that might determine the playoffs as far as who gets in and who gets left out, especially in the Pac-12, because a lot of times the Pac-12 doesn't get anybody in. But 3:30 ABC, we have the Oregon Ducks and the Washington Huskies. CBS 3:30 Texas A&M at Tennessee. Fox Sports 1 3:30 Kansas at Oklahoma State. Then we have Troy and Army on the CBS Sports Network. Illinois at Maryland on NBC. Florida at South Carolina on the SEC Network. Wake Forest at Virginia Tech on the ACC Network. BYU at TCU on ESPN. And Florida Atlantic at South Florida on ESPN 2. And speaking of South Carolina, I heard yesterday that Shane Beamer's weekly press conference, which I believe he does on Monday, he was talking about how it's a good thing that the administrators and the presidents of schools don't look at the programs the same way fans do. And the reason why I bring this up is because what he said is accurate. What he said was right. But in my personal opinion, in order for him to just bring it up out of nowhere, he must be feeling some kind of pressure. Otherwise, these are things you just wouldn't talk about. But he said that to fans, we always feel like if our team has a new coach and he wins 5 games in year one, and in year two he wins 6 or 7, then most fans think, well, if we can get 5 wins in year one and 6 or 7 in year two, then by year three we should get 8 wins. And if you don't get 8 wins in year three after getting 5 in year one and 6 or 7 in year two, then you feel like you're going backwards. Why are we winning 5 in year one, 7 in year two, and then we're going back to 5 or 6 in year three? And what he was saying is that's the way the fans look at it, but if you know anything at all about football, you know that that's not always reality. Sometimes your team can be improving on the field, but you're not improving record-wise. And he's right. He's correct. That's 100% true statement. But I just wonder why he brought that up out of the blue. And maybe he was asked about it. I don't know. I didn't see the press conference. All I know is I read an article where he made that statement during his press conference. And my thought process is, why are you talking about that unless people are wondering why you're not any better this year than you were last year? 4 o'clock. The winner of this game is more than likely, unless something drastic happens, going to win their half of the Big Ten. That's Iowa at Wisconsin, and that game might be first team to 17 wins. 4 o'clock on ESPN. We have Ohio at Northern Illinois. 6:30 on the CW network is Louisville at Pittsburgh. 7 o'clock on ESPN is Auburn at LSU. Fox Sports 1 has Kansas State at Texas Tech. Marshall at Georgia State will be on ESPN 2. And the CBS Sports Network has Wyoming at Air Force. 7:30, we have USC at Notre Dame. Two teams that have had a long-standing rivalry for a long time in college football. And this game may determine whether or not USC can make the playoffs because, of course, since they're in the Pac-12, they have so many tough opponents coming up down the stretch. So if they lose to Notre Dame, I think they're pretty much out of the playoff hunt, because all those top teams they've got coming up, they're going to lose at least one of those. So if they lose Saturday, they'll be at least a 2-loss team. ABC at 7:30, we have Miami at North Carolina. The SEC Network at 7:30, we have Missouri at Kentucky. And speaking of press conferences, earlier in the week, Kentucky coach Mark Stoops, during his weekly press conference, made the statement that if the fans want to win more, he encourages the donors to give more money, because programs like Georgia, they have bought some pretty good players. And if Kentucky wants to compete with them, then they need their donors to step up and give more money so that Kentucky can get the players that Georgia has. That's another statement that's true. He's 100% correct in that statement. But the problem is, when you just play Georgia and you lost to them, it looks like you're whining. So even though he's correct, he's right, I think it's a bad time to make that statement. But the only problem with Mark Stoops making that statement, even though it's a correct statement, is before NIL started, and there was no such thing as NIL, and there was no such thing as players getting endorsement deals. When Georgia played Kentucky, Kentucky still didn't beat them. So it's not like Kentucky used to beat Georgia until all of a sudden the NIL started, and now Georgia has the better players. Before NIL started, Kentucky couldn't beat Georgia. So it's not like the NIL is a difference in Kentucky beating Georgia and Kentucky not beating Georgia. They didn't beat Georgia before the NIL stuff. 8 o'clock on Fox, we have UCLA at Oregon State. The ACC Network, NC State at Duke. And ESPN-U, we have UAB at UTSA. Then at 9:45 on Fox Sports 1, we have Boise State at Colorado State. And 11 o'clock Saturday night, no 10:30 games this week, but 11 o'clock Saturday night on the CBS Sports Network is San Diego State at Hawaii. And I am honestly, really, truly, genuinely curious on why that game is 11 o'clock, because it's in Hawaii, and Hawaii has played their home games at midnight for, I don't know, 10 years or so. So I am curious as to why instead of midnight, it's been bumped up to 11 o'clock. I'm guessing they think more folks might watch if you start an hour earlier. But I'm just not sure how many people actually watch Hawaii football, no matter what time they play. But speaking of Mark Stoops' press conference, Syracuse head coach Dino Babers, he said pretty much the same thing in his press conference. He was asked about his depth and, why does he not have depth at certain positions and what it's like coaching without so much depth. And he said, well, our depth is in the transfer portal. Our depth went to Florida State. Look what Florida State is doing. And another statement kind of like Mark Stoops. He's accurate. He's correct. He's right. But when you say stuff like that after you lose, it comes across as you're whining. If you say stuff like that in the middle of May or the middle of June, people overlook it. But when you say it during the season, after you're getting beat, then all of a sudden it looks like you're trying to find an excuse as to why you're getting beat. So Dino Babers and Shane Beamer and Mark Stoops, all three said some pretty accurate things in their weekly press conference, but it's just things that normally you don't hear about during this time of the year. Normally, these are the types of conversations that coaches have in the off season. Typically, during the season, when you have whoever your team is has his, coach weekly press conference, it's normally you recap the game you just played, and then you preview the game you got coming up that weekend. And that's usually pretty much all coaches talk about during their press conferences during the season. You recap the game you just played, you preview the game that's coming up, and then you'll talk about, injuries and things like that. You don't talk about all the off-the-field stuff during the season. So even though all three coaches were accurate in their statements, it's just strange and odd for coaches to talk about this kind of stuff during the season. These are usually conversations you have in the off season. But any thoughts on any of this, please feel free to let me know. And don't forget, it's about 48 hours from now, depending on when you watch this video, that I'll be at 244 Livestock Road, East Denali, Georgia, for SWA Fightmare. I believe this is the 18th Fightmare. I know I talked about it earlier in the week, and I said we're going to have 2 cage matches, and we're going to have a costume contest, and we're going to have a casket match, and now, also add to the show, we're going to be having a dog collar match. So all that and more is coming up Saturday night at 244 Livestock Road, East Denali, Georgia, SWA Fightmare. Doors open at 6 o'clock, and bell time is 7 o'clock. Front row, sold out. Second row, sold out. Third row, sold out. And I believe fourth row is just about sold out. So you better go ahead and get your tickets while you can. Homes for Our Troops is a publicly funded 501c nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans. Since the 2004 inception, nearly 90 cents of every dollar spent has gone directly to our program services for veterans. Visit at hfotusa.org. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. Where do baby cats learn to swim? The kiddie pool. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.